Hi! I know this setup looks really fancy, but is it really necessary? Or is a hoop good enough? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, I'm Jackie from Adam Hart Cross Stitch, and today we are talking frames. Specifically, I wanted to talk about this scroll frame and stand that were gifted to me from Painting Fairy Cross Stitch. So I did not pay for these items, but this video is not sponsored. They are not paying me for a review. But I had mentioned on a recent Stitch With Me video that I had been gifted this frame and stand, and a lot of you were interested to hear a little bit more about them. So now that I've had a chance to spend a little bit more time with them both, I want to give you all my thoughts. To start off, we need to just talk about cross-stitch frames in general. Now, for me personally, I've never been a fan of a hoop. And every time I say that in a video, I will get at least a handful of comments saying, well, have you tried such and such hoop? No, probably not. At least for me, I feel like there are such better alternatives out there that I haven't had a strong desire to really try specific brands of hoop to find the best one. But that might not be everyone's opinions on them. So if you have a hoop that you think is amazing, please do feel free to drop it down in the comments below, because that also helps other folks who are maybe looking for the perfect hoop. Now, my issues with hoops in general, one are the hoop marks that they leave on your fabric. Now, if I'm working with a smaller project and I can just fit it in a hoop and the whole design fits in that spot and I don't need to move the hoop around, it really doesn't bug me all that much. But I'm not someone I think you will ever catch working on a really large project and then just moving my hoop all around the fabric to work on different sections. I don't like the hoop marks that it leaves. I don't like the thought of smushing my stitches underneath the frame of the hoop. And just in general, I am not a fan of the tension that a hoop provides. I think that is where buying a specific brand of hoop or style of hoop might make a difference. But again, because I already have some other issues with hoops, I've never felt inclined to really try different brands to find one that offers really great tension. But to the benefit of the hoop, they are really easy to find. Even at your like big name craft stores that maybe have just like a little teeny tiny cross stitch section, they're gonna have a hoop there that you can find. So they're very convenient in that way. You can just pop down to your store and typically find these. For the most part, they're lightweight, fairly easy to hold, and you can typically find hoops that are fairly inexpensive. So they're really nice and accessible in that way. So as someone who has not really been a fan of hoops in the past and really gravitates towards also working on bigger projects, I've always really loved scroll frames. I've talked about this one quite a bit in past videos. There's tons of different types of scroll frames out there. There's the traditional ones that are just basically a wooden dowel, and it will actually have a piece of fabric attached to it, and you then sew your project onto the fabric. There's also what's called a split rod frame, and essentially your wooden dowel will be split like this down the middle, and you slide your fabric in there and then roll it up. So a little bit easier than having to actually sew it in. This one though is pretty cool. It actually has these little clasps. So you attach your fabric here just using these little plastic clasps and then roll this whole thing to tighten the tension. Now, what I love about scroll frames, and let me actually get this one loaded up so I can show you. So I'm just gonna start by removing these little clamps and then take my project, this is the top of it, and just try to get it as straight as possible. Sometimes I like to start from the middle with that first clasp down, then the sides. Again, trying to just keep the fabric as straight as possible. It will help with tension. All right, and then we're gonna repeat the same thing on the bottom. Again, as straight and even as you can get the fabric, the better. And then once your fabric is loaded up, you just tighten these rods. And that's kind of a scroll frame in a nutshell. So now that you can kind of see what it looks like when you have a project loaded up on a scroll frame, what I really love about using scroll frames is that you're not going to get any hoop or crease marks on your fabric or your project at all. Now, this example, I will admit, is not the best because the whole length of this project fits right here on the frame. But if this were a really long piece of fabric and a very long project design, you just adjust these bars as you go. So if you start at the top and then reach the bottom of your stitchable area, all you need to do is kind of loosen your bars at the top and bottom, and then you can roll and adjust your fabric to change which section you're working on. Now, the negative thing with scroll frames, if you work on a lot of different sized projects, you're gonna need a lot of different frames because your scroll frame really should always be wider than your project is so that you can load it up properly. Now, sometimes, yes, you might be able to fold over your edges just a little bit if it's just slightly too small for the frame, but it can kind of mess up the tension and just really isn't the best way to be using a scroll frame. Speaking of tension, the tension on most scroll frames isn't fantastic. Some are definitely better than others. But because your fabric is only attached at the top and bottom, a lot of times people really struggle with the tension along the sides. Now, there's little elastic side tensioners you can buy, and essentially you'll have a little clip and you'll place a couple of these along the side of your fabric. And then you can just use an elastic, hook your elastic to the clip, pull it nice and tight, and that helps with the tension quite a bit. But in full transparency, I find them a little bit annoying to use. And again, it's just annoying when something isn't perfect and you need to buy extra things to make it work well. Scroll frames are also going to trend on the more expensive side. You can find some inexpensive ones, but again, you're typically going to have to buy like multiple different sizes of them depending on the variety of projects you work on. And as they start to get bigger, these become really hard to actually hold and then stitch with. So even this one, which is a smaller sized scroll frame, can be a little bit awkward trying to get comfortable. So a lot of times people are gonna have to get some type of stand to use with their scroll frame. And again, those are gonna vary in price. When I first started using scroll frames, I just bought a very inexpensive lap stand just to figure out if I even liked using a scroll frame or liked using a stand. So it's definitely worthwhile. Like you can kind of start small to see if you even like something and then build your way up. For me, because of some of the tension issues and just the expense of having to invest in multiple different sizes of scroll frames, I've landed happily on using Q-snaps. Now, I've talked about Q-snaps in many of my past videos. I promise they're not paying me to say anything. But what I really like about them is they crease way less than a hoop. I feel a little bit safer with them putting them over existing stitches than I do with the hoop, especially if you put like a small piece of fabric or felt. I just really feel like it doesn't smash the stitches as much as a hoop does. The tension is really great. It gives way better tension than a scroll frame. And yes, you might need to readjust the tension every once in a while, but it's not as hard to do as it is with the hoop. You just kind of rotate these clasps and it just gets your tension nice and taut again. The other really nice thing with the Q-snaps, they are a lot lighter than most of your scroll frames are gonna be, even when it's a big size like this, because it's just plastic. And they are fully customizable. So you could invest in a couple of different sizes of Q-snaps, and then you can mix and match all the pieces to get however big or small you want it to be. Now, this project is one that is a pretty like large width. This is kind of the bigger size of what I work with. And you can see I'm able to get a Q-snap that's gonna fit my whole design in the stitching area, at least width-wise. Now, as I move down the fabric, I will need to take it off the Q-snap, readjust, but I find the Q-snaps easy to do that with. And compared to a really good scroll frame, the Q-snaps are way less expensive. Definitely more than a hoop, but again, it's for me, I feel like the best middle ground that I've found. Now, Q-snaps aren't heavy, especially as you start getting to bigger sizes. They can also be a little bit bulky to get comfortable to stitch in hand. I do have a floor stand, which is my preferred way to stitch, and there's an additional attachment I use to get my Q-snap on there. I think one of the downsides with Q-snaps is for a lot of stands out there, they're not necessarily made to work with Q-snaps, especially your ones that clamp. They might be able to clamp to a hoop or the edge of a scroll frame, but because Q-snaps are rounded and pretty thick, sometimes a lot of the clamp style frames are not going to attach to these correctly. So you just need to keep that in mind. If you're in the market for a stand and you like using Q-snaps, do some research to see if it's gonna truly work with the Q-snap. So in a quick summary, at least to kind of highlight what my personal preferences have been up until this point is, one, my style is one, I tend to work on larger projects and hoops have never really been my favorite thing to use. And while I really love using scroll frames, because of just the investment needed to buy multiple different sizes, and then also not feeling like the tension is the best, landed on this middle ground of, being really happy for the most part with using Q-snaps. So Painting Fairy Cross Stitch, like I mentioned in the beginning of this video, they sent me a massively big scroll frame to try out. There are some things I'm really impressed with that I want to talk about. There are some things that are kind of a bummer about it. But the first thing I want to do is actually get a project loaded up on this so I can talk about it. So the first thing to note, which I think is pretty cool about this scroll frame, this is it at its widest, but it's actually connected here with these metal plates. You can remove the metal plates and then you have a scroll frame that is half the width. That is a really nice benefit of this being aluminum instead of wood, is for purchasing one scroll frame, you're basically getting two different sizes, which again, I think is really nice. The bummer with it is the plates, there's 3 of them, they're all screwed in and you need to use this little itty bitty, I think these are called Allen wrenches, I actually don't know. Maybe that's not an Allen wrench. Whatever these things are, they always come with IKEA furniture. You have to use these and remove, for a 12 screws each and every time you want to change the size. So I'm going to start with removing these screws and loading a smaller project onto here so we can just kind of get it all set up. All right, so we've got our little wrench here and we're just going to remove these plates. All right, I feel like that's a horrible noise, but they just slide right out once you get them loose enough. So we'll repeat with the next 2. Am I missing a screw there? I think I'm missing a screw there. On there too? Nope. Oh my gosh. There we go. And you don't need to remove them all the way. You just got to loosen them. All right, last one. So now that I've got that one long piece broken down into 2, we can go ahead and get a project loaded up. So what you need, it comes with these plastic like dowels, which is what's going to hold your fabric in these grooves here. They also provide this little tool to help out with the whole process. So again, I just want to get my fabric lined up as best as I can, and having this as straight as possible does help. So we'll just use this tool to tuck the fabric in and then put this little dowel in there. All right, so that's the top. Just slide this to the bottom and repeat the same process. Sometimes I will just take my time to readjust. Again, I just want my fabric as even as possible. All right, second dowel. And now I'm gonna just give an initial turn. Now the next piece of the puzzle are these tension rods. So now with these rods, the way that this works is a little bit different than a traditional scroll frame, but I want to get my project wound up as tight-ish as I can here while having these bars free. The only place I can't slide these on is where I have this dowel in. So just keep that in mind. But I'm gonna go ahead and slide these on, and you can get these as close to your work as you want. All right, so now I can't rotate those like I would a traditional scroll frame. Instead, what you do, again, just getting it as straight and even as I can, you start rotating these, and that's what's going to create your tension. Again, readjusting here and there because I want it as straight as possible. And with each twist, it's pushing this higher, which is creating the tension. Now, look how freaking good that tension is. Now, like I mentioned earlier, there are some top of the line scroll frames out there. The one that comes to my mind are the Millennium frames. I've heard those are incredible. I think they work fairly similarly to this. I have not used them myself, so I cannot compare it to this, but the tension that this gives is better than any other frame I've ever used. Full stop. Now on one side of this, there's a little bit of give with the tension not being crazy tight, not enough to warrant the need for using any type of extra clip or fastener on the side. It's really just, unless you have your fabric loaded up on here, perfectly straight and even, there's always going to be one side that's a little bit off, and that's where you're going to get some of the little bit of lack in tension. But if you're someone who wants to stitch on a drum tight fabric, I think this will blow your mind. It's so tight that I actually wouldn't even feel comfortable leaving it on the frame this tight if I weren't stitching on it. I would loosen this each and every time in between stitchy sessions. Sometimes I do that with my Q-snap. A lot of times I don't. I never feel the need to loosen a hoop because it will just loosen on its own. But this is so tight, I would loosen it each and every time I was setting it down. So I cannot speak highly enough about the tension that this provides. I think the other really nice thing about this frame, and it's what I talked about, when you buy one of these sizes, you're really getting two sizes of scroll frame. Now that's kind of a big deal with a lot of the wooden frames. Again, you have to buy multiple different frames for multiple different size projects. And because these side rods you can have as far in as you want, I think you get just a lot more use with the sizing with this. Some of the drawbacks, even though this is aluminum, it's still heavy. This is the smaller size one. I don't think there would be any way for me to stitch with this holding it on my own. I think you have to use a stand with these frames. Obviously, that's going to add to the cost right off the bat. Most stands are not cheap. Now, speaking of cost, I also wouldn't say that this frame is by any means inexpensive. Now, I think when it comes to using this frame and sometimes other scroll frames as well, but definitely this one in particular, I wouldn't say it's hard to get it set up, but it's not as easy as just using a hoop or a Q-snap. So if you're someone who is constantly switching out the projects you're working on, it might be cumbersome to constantly moving projects in and out of a frame like this. Now, if you have a bunch of them, it's not that big of a deal, right? You can leave a bunch of your projects loaded up on these, just making sure that you're loosening the tension. But again, if you're rotating projects a lot and you're just using this one frame, a little cumbersome. For me, I tend to stitch on the same thing for weeks, if not months at a time. So that wouldn't be a huge drawback for me. But again, everyone's got different styles, different ways of stitching. So those are some quick thoughts. What I want to do now is take this thing apart. I'm going to put it back to the larger size. We're going to load up an even bigger project onto the large size. And then we're going to kind of jump into the stand that works with these frames that Painting Fairy Cross Stitch sent me. All right, so now essentially it's the same process in reverse. To loosen the tension, you just start twisting these. Same on the other side. Slide those off. And then we're just gonna pull that plastic dowel out. Same on the top. So now we're gonna attach these two pieces back together. And it doesn't matter which three sides you put these plates on. It's just one end is always gonna be open. All right, and then we're just going to tighten each of these 4 screws. Okay, so now we want to rotate both the bottom and top to whichever edge doesn't have a metal plate. And this process will be just like with the smaller size. So I've got my fabric here. I find it easiest to do this if you have just a little bit of fabric coming out of the top. And the wider your fabric is, honestly, the harder it is to get it in there totally straight. The more you take your time to get your fabric in there nice and even, the better the tension's gonna be. All right, so now we'll need 2 of these rods for the top. We'll slide one in from each side. Same thing on the bottom. And this flat part, it's like a triangle. The flat part goes on the bottom. I'm going to slide this down so I can show you the other end. But we've got 2 more plastic dowels and we'll just repeat. So now, using this as a guide, set it kind of right there at about the length that these need to be. And I'm going to start rolling it up from the bottom. All right, so this isn't tight, but if I roll it again, it's almost too tight. So that's kind of the sweet spot of where you're going to be able to slide these on easily. I gotta do, okay, one more roll because I need to be on a side where there's no dowels. And I'm loosening this just a little bit more so it can slide in easy. Again, just trying to get it as close to the fabric as possible. And we're gonna repeat on the other side. All right, so we're gonna go ahead, slide this side on, try to get everything close together. And now I'm gonna start the process. I like to I wanna get these kind of even to start. This one's a little bit shorter. All right, they feel even. So now I'm gonna start twisting them at the same time. Okay, so I've got it nice and tight. Again, it's so taut. It's pretty awesome. Now, because this is a wider project, it's harder to get it like perfectly straight. And you can see where I don't have my fabric lined up perfectly straight. There's this like warp. If I were stitching on this for real, I would go back and redo it and try to get that on there straighter because I don't want to warp my fabric like that. So that is, I think, one of the nuisances of getting a scroll frame like this set up. The wider your fabric, the harder it's always going to be. That's just kind of the way scroll frames are. All right. So obviously, this is one of my bigger projects that I have, and I could still fit a way larger piece of fabric on this scroll frame. So that's a definite plus. Clearly, there's a little bit of a learning curve here, as evidenced by me not really getting my fabric on there perfectly even, which is going to create some warping if you're not able to do it. That's really more of a me problem. That's user error. It's something I would get better with time. Now, even though this is aluminum, I wouldn't call this light. I think this is heavy. There's no way to use this frame without using a stand. Now, thankfully, Painting Fairy did in fact send me a stand. Now, this is, I don't even know how to get this in frame. Hold on, hold, oh my gosh. So this just rests on top of that there. Oh my gosh. Now, this is clearly not a tabletop or desk stand. It is a lap stand. So I'm gonna move over to my couch so I can give you a better idea of what this is supposed to look like, and we will talk more about it. All right, so this is the stand kind of in action, if you will. It's a lap stand, so again, it just is freestanding. You just set it over your lap. Your frame just sits on top of the stand. Now, right now, this is way too high up for me. The nice thing is this is fully adjustable. I can change how wide it is. I can make it wider, more narrow. I can raise it up higher. I can set it down lower. My issue though is it is not easy to adjust. And I'm going to show you because I want to get this set up in like just the right spot to really show you what it's like to stitch with it. But this was also an issue just putting this thing together. Now, I am someone who loves to put together IKEA furniture. Like, I pride myself on being pretty good at it. I just like it. So I am not opposed to building things, putting them together, following a little book telling you step by step what to do. I struggled with this. Now, they do provide some instructions. They honestly weren't like detailed enough for me. I think once I was able to go online and look at like the exact model of stand that this is, because they have a couple of different ones, that did help me a lot. Like seeing what exactly does the finished product look like kind of helped me configure this. But that's, I think, like one of my biggest takeaways with the drawback of this thing. Now, to adjust it and get it to where exactly you want it width or height wise. Again, you need to pull out one of these little, I'm going to keep calling it an Allen wrench because I don't know what it's called. You got to pull these out. Now, these come with it. It's like they provide you the tools that you need. I think it's a bit of a pain. So I'm going to do my best to try to adjust this lower so you can get an idea of how it works. If I think I can bring this down to start. Which way does it go? No. Now I'm sure I set this up in a way that is probably making it harder than it needs to be. Kind of where sometimes the instructions were lacking a little bit. It almost wasn't specific enough with what direction certain things needed to be facing. But let's see how this works. Okay. Again, this is heavy. The angle of this is good, and that is adjustable. You can make it flatter or more angled up. And they have different versions of this frame. This obviously is the lap stand. It just sits over your lap while you stitch. They also have floor stands, which would be on the floor, and then you just slide them towards you. I think obviously if you take the time in the beginning and you get it set up exactly how it's gonna work, and then you never have to adjust it again, I think it would be fine. Like, that's not a big deal. But what I don't love about it is any adjustment you wanna make, even if it's just the angle that your stand is holding the frame at, I hate that you need a screwdriver to do that. I hate that you need an Allen wrench. So yes, it is highly adjustable. I don't love that you need a tool to do it. I don't find it super easy to use. Again, if it's just a one-time issue, just spend the time, get it kind of all tweaked exactly how you want it, and then you never have to touch it again. I think, again, that that would be fine. The other thing I don't love, now this is also aluminum. It's pretty lightweight. For as like big as it is, it's relatively light. Now, what I don't like, and this is really a personal preference of mine and has to do more with the space that I have and comparing it to the setup I have now. Again, because this is difficult to get set up and adjusted the exact way you want it, I don't want to dismantle this to store it anywhere. So then I need to find space to set this big bulky thing down when I'm not stitching. Now, if I had a nice big dedicated craft room with a dedicated stitching spot, that might not be such a big deal. I don't have that. I don't love leaving stuff all over my house. It's just out in the open. Again, that's just personal preference of mine. Your preferences might be totally different. That could be a non-issue for you. I've just been setting this up high in a shelf in my garage, and then it's just not really accessible. So it's a little bit bulky. I wish I loved this more. Maybe if it were a floor stand and not the lap stand version, I could see myself maybe being able to adjust to that a little bit better. Setup as a whole, it's not cheap, but again, I did not purchase these. They were sent to me. Me personally, would I spend what this costs for the stand? No. Would I spend what it costs for the frame? Yeah. But here's what I hate. I can't figure out any way to use this frame without using the stand. So that's kind of my big bummer. Now, the stand that I normally use to stitch with, get us a little bit adjusted here, move my screwdriver. So this is a Lowry work stand. So typically with this floor stand, this is the standard clamp that comes with it. I can put a smaller scroll frame on here, no problem. It holds it really well. If the scroll frames get too long, the Lowry stands don't do a great job. They'll kind of tip right over. If you have it tucked under a couch like I do here, it's not the end of the world, but there's like a special attachment that the Lowry stands have to support those bigger scroll frames. But the issue is, because this bar here is round and the frame is so heavy, it doesn't matter how tight I screw the Lowry stand, this just will not be supported at all. So there's no way for me to use this frame with the stand that I really like using. All right, so as I was editing this video, I took a closer look at the large frame adapter for the Lowry stands, and I'm wondering maybe it could work for these big frames. So if you have experience using these, please let me know. Obviously, I have not used these. I'm really just looking at them for the first time. So maybe these would work. The last thing I want to give you real quick is just the point of view of what the lap stand looks like from my point of view. So if I were to be stitching, this is the point of view I would have. So even though it's a lap stand, because it's heavy enough, especially because the frame is so heavy, there's really good stability with this stand. That's one of the drawbacks sometimes of using lap stands in general, is they're not going to be as stable, you know, because they're on a soft surface like your couch or your bed and it's just sitting over your lap. But this does have really nice stability. You can adjust, again, the angle that your frame sits at, but just to give you an idea of kind of the point of view, having this on your lap, using it to stitch. So I think that really sums up, in a nutshell, my overall thoughts and feelings. Love the frame, don't love the stand, and unfortunately, I'm just happy enough with my current setup that I don't think I would like reinvent everything I've got going on just to be able to use this frame. Although it does sadden me a little bit because, again, I really, really like this frame. If you have any thoughts, suggestions, experiences even using a frame that's this big and has this much weight, and you figured out maybe some good tips and tricks for making it work, please leave it all below in the comments. I would love to hear your experience and your thoughts on this setup. A big thank you to Painting Fairy Cross Stitch for sending me this. This was just like really nice of them. Again, the items were gifted to me. They are not paying me for a review, and these thoughts are 100% my own. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed watching. If you have a favorite type of hoop, frame, scroll frame, Q-snap, whatever it is, let me know in the comments below how you like to stitch. Thank you again so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more content like this, please do all the good things, like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps support my channel so I can continue putting out content like this. If there's something specific you want to see covered in a future video, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you again for watching, and until next time, happy stitching.